Good reader. Let me start by wishing ye a happy Yule, as we hobbits call the turning of the year. 'Tis a time for mirth, feasting, and the kind of jollity that could make even the gloomiest took dance a jig. This year, as always, I, Bramble Thornfoot of Hobbiton, found myself caught up in the whirl of festivities that marked one Yule and two Yule. Let me spin you the tale, if ye care to listen. And if not, let me spin you the tale, if ye care to listen. Pull up a chair by the fire, won't ye? The story starts on the eve of one Yule. The lanterns were hung all along Bagshot Row, their light dancing like tiny stars among the holly wreaths and evergreen garlands. From every smile came the sound of singing and laughter, the sort of noise that could warm even Old Man Maggot's scowling face. My own kin had gathered at my cousin Daisy's house. She's got the biggest fireplace in all Hobbiton and brews an ale that's famous as far as Bywater. The room was aglow with firelight and candles, casting flickering shadows on walls bedecked with ribbons and sprigs of mistletoe. Little ones darted about underfoot, their cheeks flushed with excitement as they tried to snatch sugar biscuits and candied nuts from the tables. "Ramble," Daisy called out, her hands on her hips. "You've been standing by the door like a scarecrow in a snowstorm. Are you going to come in, or shall I fetch a stick to prod you with?" "I'm just taking it all in, Daisy," I replied, grinning as I took a deep breath of the air, rich with the mingling scents of roasted chestnuts, spiced cider, and the faint whiff of pipeweed. "It's the most splendid Yule yet." "Oh, it'll get even better," said Daisy with a wink, and she disappeared into the crowd. Now, there's a tradition in the Shire for one Yule, and it's one of my favorites. The telling of tales. Every hobbit who fancies themselves a bit of a wordsmith gets their chance to shine, spinning yarns both fanciful and true. That night, as the cider mugs were filled and refilled, I found myself drawn into the circle around old Tolman Cotton, who was just starting on one of his legendary stories. "Now, this here's a tale of a Yule long past," he began, his voice low and rich, like the hum of bees on a summer's day. "A tale of how the very first Hobbit Yule was celebrated, back in the days when snow covered all the Shire, and the stars themselves seemed closer to the earth. As Tolman spoke, his words painted pictures in my mind. A vision of hobbits dancing under starlight, their breath misting in the cold air as they sang songs of old. The magic of it wrapped around us all, so much so that we hardly noticed the hours slipping by. It wasn't until the clock struck 12 and the great Yule log in Daisy's hearth sent up a shower of sparks that we realized two Yule had arrived. But there's more to tell, my friend. The night was only beginning. Now let me tell you, there's a kind of magic in the air when two Yule begins. The Shire feels different, as if every blade of grass and every frost-kissed branch is holding its breath, waiting for the celebration to unfold. As the clock struck 12, a cheer went up that could have woken the trolls in the Ettimals. "Happy Yule!" we all cried, lifting our mugs high. Frothy ale sloshed onto the floor, and the little ones whooped with delight despite being half asleep by then. Daisy, ever the master of ceremony, banged a ladle against a pot to call us all to order. "Right then, my fine hobbits," she announced. "The first order of business, the great Yule feast." There was no arguing with that. In a flurry of activity, tables were cleared, benches were dragged closer to the hearth, and plates began piling high with roast goose, honeyed ham, and an assortment of pies that would have made Bilbo Baggins himself proud. I seated myself between my Uncle Gorbow and young Poppy Proudfoot, a lass of about 8 who had a mischievous glint in her eye that promised trouble. "Uncle Gorlo," I said, passing him a dish of mushrooms stewed in cream. "What's the Yule without your famous riddle? You've kept us waiting long enough, don't you think?" Gorlo rubbed his chin theatrically, his white beard quivering like snow on a pine branch. "Aye, Bramble. I suppose it's time, he said, his voice deep and resonant. He leaned forward, peering at us all with his sharp grey eyes. Listen close now, for here it is. What dances in shadow, whispers in light, and holds the stars within its might. The room fell into a thoughtful silence, broken only by the clinking of forks and the occasional sip of cider. I glanced at Poppy, whose brow was furrowed in concentration. She leaned over to me and whispered, "It's the night sky, isn't it?" "Well, don't spoil it, lass," I whispered back with a grin. But Gorlo wasn't done with his riddling. "While ye chew on that, I'll tell ye a tale," he said, and the room hushed. Gorlo had a knack for weaving riddles into his stories, and this one was no exception. He spoke of an ancient hobbit who climbed a hill on Yule night to catch a falling star, only to find himself lost in a world of shadow and starlight. As the tale unfolded, I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine, though the room was warm as summer. Gorlo's words carried a weight, like the echo of something half remembered and half dreamed. When he finished, there was a moment of silence before a thunderous applause broke out. "That's the spirit of Yule right there," Daisy exclaimed, her eyes bright with pride. "And now, who's ready for the Yule Games?" Ah, the games. A hobbit's Yule wouldn't be complete without them. But I'll not spoil the fun just yet. Now let me tell you, dear listener, Yule Games are no mere child's play. We hobbits take them seriously, but with the sort of seriousness that has laughter chasing after it like a puppy with too much energy. After Uncle Gorlov's tale had us all pondering the night sky, Daisy took the lead once more. "Gather round one and all," she called, her cheeks glowing red from cider and cheer. "It's time for the grand contest of Pass the Pudding. You know the rules. For those unfamiliar, Pass the Pudding is a hobbit tradition that combines speed, coordination, and a healthy disregard for propriety. A steaming bowl of treacle pudding is passed from hobbit to hobbit, each of us using only one hand, and without spilling a single drop. Naturally, the pudding grows stickier as it cools, and the game grows rowdier as it progresses. "On your marks," Daisy shouted, and Poppy Proudfoot, seated beside me, giggled in anticipation. The pudding bowl started its journey with old Widow Rumble, who had a twinkle in her eye and surprisingly nimble fingers for her age. She handed it to my cousin Ferdebrand, who promptly fumbled it, eliciting a round of groans and cheers from the crowd. "Careful, Ferdy," I called, laughing as the bowl was thrust into my own hands. The pudding was warm and sticky, and for a moment I feared I'd drop it, but I managed to pass it on to Poppy, whose small hands proved surprisingly adept. Round and round it went, growing heavier and wobblier with each pass, until, at last, it landed with a satisfying plop in Gorlo's lap. "Well, that settles it," Daisy declared. "Gorlo's buying the first round of ale next Yule." As the laughter subsided, the second round of games began. There was a pie-eating contest. Young Tom Cotton won handily, a dance-off that saw Daisy spinning like a top, and, of course, the traditional Yule log tossing. Now, you may think hobbits too small for such feats of strength, but let me assure you, when it comes to rolling a log downhill, we're second to none. The night wore on, and the laughter grew softer as the little ones began nodding off, their faces smeared with crumbs and jam. The Yule log in the hearth burned low, casting a golden glow that wrapped around us like a warm blanket. Someone started singing softly, an old Yule carol about stars and seasons turning, and one by one, we joined in, our voices mingling, until the song became a single, harmonious thread weaving through the night. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the snow-covered fields in hues of rose and gold, we hobbits stepped outside to greet the new year. The air was crisp and still, and for a moment, all was quiet save for the soft crunch of snow beneath our feet. Another Yule come and gone, Daisy said, her voice tinged with contentment. "Here's to the next." "To the next," we echoed, raising our mugs and voices to the sky. And that, my friend, is how we hobbits of the Shire welcome a new year. With hearts full, bellies fuller, and enough memories to keep us warm until spring.